The ultrasound froze, the room went silent, and then the doctor whispered, "There's something else in there. It's not human." A pregnant woman 5 months along suddenly feels her baby kicking in ways no baby should. What they found inside her womb, alongside her unborn child, shocked the entire medical team. This is a true story you won't forget. Subscribe now to hear the full tale and discover what happened when science had no answers. It started with a kick, not a gentle flutter or a rhythmic thud like Olivia had read in pregnancy books. No, this felt different. Sharp, sudden, almost violent. She sat up in bed, her hand pressed tightly to her belly. The room was dark, the clock beside her flashing 3:17 a.m. The heater hummed softly, but inside her something had stirred like a twist in the earth. At 20 weeks pregnant, Olivia Campbell had begun to recognize the subtle language of life within her. Little pulses, delicate nudges, whispers of a future she had dared to believe in after years of loss. But this wasn't like before. This felt wrong. She sat still, trying to sense it again. The house was silent, her mother asleep in the next room. Outside, the October wind pressed against the windows, whispering its way through the trees. Olivia inhaled deeply, her hand never leaving her belly. Then it came again, harder this time. A low, rolling motion that moved from one side of her uterus to the other, as if something large were swimming from shore to shore. Her breath caught. It wasn't just strong, it was calculated, intentional. It felt like it was trying to go somewhere, like it knew where it wanted to be. Olivia had lost 2 pregnancies before. The first had ended quietly, at 12 weeks. With no explanation and little closure, the second had broken her open. At 19 weeks, the baby's heart had simply stopped. The doctors had called it one of those things. A fluke, a medical ghost. No answers, only grief. That loss had nearly broken her faith in her body, in the process, in hope itself. But this time felt different from the beginning. Her body held steady, the appointments went smoothly, and the baby's heartbeat was strong. She had started to dream again, cautiously, carefully. She decorated a small corner of her bedroom with a bassinet and a stack of newborn blankets. She allowed herself to smile when strangers asked her due date, and now this. Another surge came, rippling from low in her pelvis up toward her ribs. She gasped. It wasn't painful, not exactly, but disturbing. It made her think of something trapped, like an animal twisting in its cage. Her mind tried to rationalize. Maybe this was normal. Maybe babies moved like this in the womb. Maybe she was simply sensitive, overreacting, haunted by the ghosts of her past. But something inside her said no. She stood barefoot on the wooden floor, her flannel pajama pants brushing against her ankles. She walked slowly to the bathroom, flicking on the yellow light. In the mirror, her face looked pale and drawn. Her eyes, once warm and bright, now held the weight of old worry. She turned sideways, placing both hands on the curve of her belly. It looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. She whispered, "Baby, are you okay in there?" No answer, just a stillness that made her stomach churn. She returned to bed but didn't sleep. For the rest of the night, she lay still, feeling, noticing, counting. The kicks came sporadically, some soft, others jarring, and sometimes she felt a slither, a stretch, a movement that didn't feel like a baby at all. At sunrise, she brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. The frost had crept in along the edges of the glass. Her mother came in around 7 a.m., robe wrapped tight, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Didn't sleep again?" she asked. Olivia nodded, her fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. "Something's off." "Is it pain?" "No," she said slowly. "It's not pain. It's movement, but it doesn't feel human." Her mother blinked, then gave her that look, half concern, half "don't do this to yourself again." But Olivia didn't elaborate. How could she describe it? How could she explain that she felt like there was something else inside her, something separate, something other? She called the clinic that afternoon. She didn't say much, just that she wasn't sure if the baby was moving normally. They offered her a slot the next morning. Olivia accepted, her voice calm, but her fingers trembled as she hung up the phone. That night, she lay in bed again, listening. The room around her was quiet, the air cold, but her belly was alive. Not with joy or connection, but with something she could only name as unrest. She placed both hands on her stomach, closed her eyes, and tried to send peace downward, into the deep place where her child floated. She didn't yet know that what she was feeling was real. She didn't know the clinic visit would change everything. She didn't know that what lived inside her was not just life, but something that should never have been there. Morning came quietly, wrapped in the gray veil of early October. Olivia stood at the kitchen sink, the warmth of the tea rising in her hands, while the cold from the glass seeped through her fingertips. The night had passed, but the unease hadn't. Something inside her had shifted, not just physically, but in the air around her. She felt watched, invaded, as if she had unknowingly opened a door she couldn't close. As she sipped, her mind wandered, not forward but backward. Memory had a way of looping like that, especially in the still moments. It had been just over a year since she lived in Mérida, Mexico. A brief escape after her second miscarriage. She'd thought the change in climate, pace, and language might slow the grieving. But even there, the ache followed her. It always did. She remembered a dinner party hosted by friends near the end of her stay, a long table set beneath hanging lanterns, the scent of lime and grilled fish in the air. A man named Raoul had brought a dish he called ceviche de camarón, shrimp marinated in citrus juice and served raw. Olivia had been reluctant but polite. She'd eaten 2 spoonfuls. That night, she'd woken up with cramps. Nothing severe, just uncomfortable. She took some over-the-counter medicine and went back to sleep. She never connected that moment to anything serious. The pain faded in a day. But in the weeks that followed, she felt different. A weight in her belly, a fatigue she couldn't explain, even though she wasn't pregnant at the time. The doctors chalked it up to stress, trauma, depression. She didn't press it. She didn't want to know more. Now, in the quiet Nebraska kitchen, she couldn't help but wonder. Had something started then? Had something entered her body that night, unnoticed and waited? Was her body a host? She shook her head. It sounded insane. Later that morning, she dressed in thick leggings and a gray maternity sweater, then drove herself to the clinic. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds that refused to rain. The small parking lot was half empty. Inside, the receptionist smiled and asked how far along she was. 20 weeks, Olivia replied, her voice flat. She was sent to waiting room C, where a lavender diffuser hissed faintly and gentle music played, something acoustic and soulless. Posters on the wall showed smiling couples holding tiny newborns. All perfect, all easy, all lies. When they called her name, she moved slowly, feeling every step in her spine. The nurse who took her vitals had kind eyes and a gentle tone. She asked if Olivia had felt the baby move. Yes, Olivia said, pausing, but it feels strange. The nurse didn't ask for details, just smiled, recorded the note, and left the room. Dr. Hammond entered 5 minutes later. Tall, lean, with streaks of gray cutting through his hair and beard, he looked like someone who had spent too much time in hospitals, too many years listening to pain. His expression was professional but never cold. There was kindness behind his eyes, buried but still there. He offered a nod. Olivia, good to see you. She managed a tired smile. I wish it were for a better reason. He sat beside her, flipping through her chart. You said the baby's been moving more? Not just more, she said, different. He looked up. Different how? She hesitated. How could she explain this without sounding irrational? Not like kicks or flutters, more like, she swallowed, rolling, shifting, like something big is moving. He paused, pen hovering over the chart. Are you in pain? No. But I feel like something is trying to go somewhere. Not just move. It feels purposeful. Dr. Hammond didn't write anything. He folded his hands together and nodded slowly. I know your history, he said gently, and I take every concern seriously. Let's start with a simple check, just to see where we are. She lay back, her sweater lifted, gel smeared across her skin. The cold made her flinch. As he moved the wand across her stomach, the room filled with the static hum of the machine. He adjusted the angle, pressed slightly deeper, eyes narrowing. There we are, he said softly. Heartbeat strong, that's good. She exhaled, her chest loosening slightly. But he didn't move the probe away, his brow furrowed. He adjusted again, then again. A shadow passed across his face. He didn't speak for a long time. Doctor? Olivia asked, her voice trembling. He glanced at her, then back at the screen. I'm going to check something. It may be nothing. But she saw the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders stiffened, the tightness in his jaw. He turned the monitor slightly, but not enough for her to see. Then he picked up his phone and texted someone quickly. When he looked at her again, his face was composed, but the warmth was gone. We'll do a more thorough ultrasound, he said calmly. Another technician will join us shortly. Is there something wrong? I just want a second look, that's all. You're not in danger. But Olivia knew, in that moment she knew something was wrong, deeply, dangerously wrong. And it wasn't the baby. The second technician arrived within 10 minutes. Her name was Margot. Young, focused, barely speaking a word, she offered Olivia a polite nod before turning her attention to the machine. Dr. Hammond stepped aside, arms folded across his chest, his jaw tight with unspoken tension. Margot adjusted the monitor, reapplied gel, and moved the probe slowly across Olivia's abdomen. The room was silent except for the rhythmic thump of the fetal heartbeat and the soft clicks of the keyboard as images were captured. Olivia lay still, eyes darting between their faces. Neither technician said a word. She wanted to ask what they were seeing, wanted to demand to see the screen, but something in their stillness kept her silent. They weren't just concentrating, they were alarmed. She could feel the shift in the room. It wasn't panic, not yet, but it was close. A cold undercurrent had taken hold, and it ran straight through her skin. Margot paused. Her fingers hovered over the screen, zooming in. The monitor displayed an odd pattern, something irregular, unfamiliar. A dense shape floated in the lower quadrant of the uterus, just behind the baby's spine. Long, curved, uncoiled. Then it moved. Olivia didn't see it, but she heard it. A sharp gasp from Margot. A quick intake of breath from Hammond. "What is it?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Hammond glanced at Margot, then stepped forward again. "We're still looking," he said softly. "I want to see the screen." He hesitated for a breath, then turned it toward her. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. The image was grainy, black and white. The baby was there, curled, hands close to its face. But just behind it, something else. A narrow, rope-like figure. It twitched, curved, then slithered slightly to the left, almost as if it were reacting to the pressure of the ultrasound. Her breath caught. "That's not part of the baby," she whispered. "No," Hammond said quietly. "It's not." The thing moved again, not with the rhythm of a heartbeat or the lazy drift of amniotic fluid. It moved with intention. Olivia felt her stomach twist. The room seemed to tilt. "What is it?" "We don't know yet," Hammond replied. But his voice held the weight of something more, something he wasn't saying. "It's alive," she murmured. Neither of them answered. A shiver moved through her body from scalp to heel, not fear, something colder, a realization. A line had been crossed. This wasn't just a complication. This wasn't a threat to her pregnancy in the abstract. This was a presence, a second life form, a parasite, and it was sharing space with her child. Margot didn't speak. Her hand moved slowly, deliberately, guiding the probe across Olivia's abdomen again, tracing the outline of the foreign shape. On the monitor, the object shifted position, this time more fluidly, like it was adjusting to avoid pressure. It elongated slightly, its thin body coiling loosely, then unfurling. It pulsed, not with a heartbeat, but with a muscular rhythm, a wave-like contraction that rippled from end to end. Dr. Hammond leaned closer to the screen, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't blink. His eyes tracked every movement with surgical stillness. Olivia stared too. Her throat was dry, her heart a staccato beat in her ears. She couldn't make sense of what she was seeing, but her instinct screamed louder than her rational mind. That wasn't normal. That wasn't part of her. That wasn't human. "It's moving," she said again, voice barely audible. Hammond didn't respond. The thing arched slightly, pressed itself against the uterine wall, then released, drifting lazily in the amniotic fluid. Each motion was distinct, deliberate, even intelligent. Olivia felt her stomach flip. She could almost sense it, not just as pressure, but as presence, as will. She tried to breathe, but her lungs felt compressed. "What is it?" she asked again, this time louder. Not just curiosity now, but desperation. Dr. Hammond stood upright, eyes still on the screen. Margot took a half step back, her hands clasped in front of her, the probe still resting lightly on Olivia's skin. "We'll need a higher resolution scan," he said carefully, "and a consult with maternal fetal medicine." "But what is it?" Olivia asked again, louder. "Tell me what I'm seeing." Hammond finally looked at her, and in that moment his expression shifted, not into alarm, but something worse. Resignation. He wasn't confused anymore. He had an idea, and he didn't want to say it. "We're seeing an elongated structure," he said clinically, "approximately 20 centimeters in length. Non-human morphology. Mobile. Mobile, she echoed. You mean it's alive? Yes. She turned her head toward the ceiling, as if the answer might be written in the sterile tiles. The room spun softly around her. Her skin prickled with a cold sweat. For a long moment, no one spoke. Hammond turned back to the monitor, watching the screen like someone studying a predator in a cage. It's not connected to the fetus, he said after a long silence. Not anatomically. Olivia blinked. Then what is it doing there? He exhaled, not in frustration, but in careful control. The words left him slowly, like he had to force them out one at a time. It appears to be moving independently. That was it. Not a mass, not an artifact, not a shadow, a thing, a living, moving thing inside her womb, with her child. The sentence echoed in her mind, loud and reverberating, louder than the heartbeat on the monitor, louder than the fluorescent hum in the room, moving, independently, and with that, something inside her began to unravel. They didn't let her go home. Dr. Hammond framed it as precautionary, just an overnight observation, he said, standard in unusual cases. But the look in his eyes betrayed something deeper, not fear, not urgency exactly, but a kind of professional uncertainty she hadn't seen from him before. They moved her to a private room on the second floor. The windows faced east, and beyond them, Nebraska lay flat and colorless beneath a pale October sky. Nurses came in and out, checking vitals, asking routine questions with plastic smiles and forced warmth. She answered them automatically. Her mind was elsewhere, trapped in that dark, silent image on the monitor. It's alive. The sentence repeated itself like a drumbeat. Not part of her child, not part of her, but something foreign, something moving on its own, inside her. The longer she sat in that sterile bed, the more surreal it became. She felt like a container, no longer a mother in waiting, but a vessel carrying more than she bargained for. No one told her anything after that first scan. No explanations, no theories, just polite deflections and vague reassurances. It was a holding pattern. She was being contained. By late afternoon, Olivia began to sense it again. The movement, subtle, just below the surface of her belly. A sweep, a shift, a slow, sinuous press against the left side of her womb. Not violent, not even aggressive, but unmistakable. She placed her hand there, trying to map it. The baby was still. But the other thing, whatever it was, had returned to its wandering. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. Downstairs, in a closed conference room behind frosted glass, 5 people sat around a digital screen displaying her ultrasound. Images rotated in sequence. The figure, long, unsegmented, and without limbs, flickered into view. It curled and uncurled in the fluid with eerie grace. The head of maternal fetal medicine, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Vance, leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. It has characteristics of Ascaris lumbricoides, she said slowly. But I've never seen one survive in this environment, let alone reach that size. It's 22 centimeters at minimum, added Hammond. We measured, maybe more. A young infectious disease fellow cleared his throat. Intrauterine parasitic infections are rare, practically non-existent in developed countries. This shouldn't be possible. But it is, Vance replied. Someone else pointed at the screen. It's not attached to any fetal structure, but it's sharing the same space. There was a long pause. What are our options? Vance asked. No one answered. Back upstairs, Olivia stared at the ceiling, the fluorescence buzzing above her like distant insects. Her body felt foreign. Her skin didn't belong to her. Even her breath seemed borrowed. She turned to her side slowly, wincing slightly at the tight pull in her lower abdomen. It wasn't pain exactly, just pressure. Presence. Her mother arrived at 6 p.m., carrying a small overnight bag and a bottle of vitamin water. She looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight Olivia carried was pulling at her too. No news? She asked. Olivia shook her head. They're hiding something, her mother said, settling into the vinyl chair beside the bed. They're not sure what it is. Silence filled the room. After a while, Olivia spoke. Her voice was distant, numb. I don't feel pregnant anymore. Her mother blinked. What do you mean? I feel colonized. It was the only word that fit. Her body was no longer hers. It had been breached, Something had crossed into a sacred place, a place meant only for nurture, and made itself at home. Later that evening, a nurse came to draw blood. Olivia asked again if anyone had updates. "They're still reviewing the scans," the nurse said gently. "A team is working on it." "A team," Olivia repeated. She pictured them. Suits, stethoscopes, monitors. Her baby's image frozen on a screen, her uterus mapped like a war zone. And no one had any answers. She didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it. Not the baby. The other thing, drifting beside her child like a ribbon of smoke. Silent, uninvited, undisturbed. She began to wonder if it knew, if her baby felt it too. If inside that quiet forming mind there was any awareness of the intruder, a recognition, a fear, or worse, a connection. By morning, Olivia's world had narrowed to one thought, circling endlessly through her exhausted brain. Something is in there with my baby, and no one knows what to do. She didn't remember falling asleep. The night had passed in slow motion, monitors blinking, footsteps echoing in the hall, nurses moving like shadows, but at some point, her body surrendered. Her mind, however, had other plans. In the dream, she was standing in front of a church. It was old, decaying brick, wood split by time, vines curling through the broken windows. The air smelled of ash and damp stone. There were no people, no sound, just the wind moving through the empty frame like a breath in a hollow chest. She stepped through the doorway. Inside, the pews were shattered. The altar had collapsed inward. Light poured through a hole in the ceiling, falling like a single spotlight onto the cracked stone floor. And there, in the center of it all, lay a baby, small, still, swaddled in white cloth so thin it looked like fog. Olivia moved forward slowly, her steps silent. She didn't question why the baby was there. She already knew. This was her child. She felt it in her bones, in the deep part of her that had been waiting for years. She dropped to her knees beside the tiny body. The baby didn't cry, didn't move. Its chest rose and fell with the soft rhythm of sleep. But then came the sound, a rustle, a drag, a slithering whisper across the stone. Olivia turned. From the shadows behind the altar, darkness began to move. Not all at once, more like tendrils. Long, thin, undulating like smoke or seaweed. They slithered from the cracks in the wall, the spaces between the floorboards. There were no eyes, no faces, just motion, intent. She reached for the baby, but her arms felt too heavy. The shadows crept closer, and then a voice, not loud but present, not from the darkness but from above, or within. "Don't leave," it said, "not yet." The voice wasn't frightening. It wasn't even unfamiliar. It sounded like memory, like her mother's lullaby, half forgotten, like the echo of her own voice when she used to talk to her belly at night. She looked up, the shadows froze. "Your child is not alone," the voice said. Olivia tried to speak but couldn't. The light from the ceiling shifted slightly, now illuminating the baby's tiny face. And in that moment the child opened its eyes, not wide, just enough to see her, just enough to know. And something in Olivia broke, not in fear, not in pain, but in recognition. Then the baby moved, not much, just a curl of the fingers, a stretch of the legs, and the shadows pulled back. Slowly they receded, slinking into the cracks, curling into silence once more. The light brightened, and the voice returned. "You are not empty, you are not alone, stay." The words lingered, soft as breath. Then everything faded. She woke with tears on her cheeks. The hospital room was quiet. Morning had not yet broken. The monitors beeped softly, steady and indifferent. But her body felt different, not lighter, not safer, but certain. She touched her stomach. There was no movement, just warmth, just presence. For the first time in days, she felt connected. Not just to the baby, but to something deeper. A thread, a promise, a reminder that whatever was inside her, whatever didn't belong, there was something else stronger, something hers. She sat up slowly, letting the feelings settle. The dream had not answered her questions. It had not removed her fear. But it had given her something better. Resolve. She would not be passive anymore. She would not be the host. She was the mother. And this child had looked at her, had seen her, had waited. Outside, the sky began to pale, a slow unfurling of dawn over frozen fields. Inside, Olivia placed both hands on her belly and whispered, "I'm staying." The call came at 9:14 a.m., but Olivia never heard it ring. Her phone had been left on silent. tucked deep inside the drawer of her bedside table. She was sitting up, staring at the window, tracing the frost that crept like veins along the edges of the glass. A nurse entered a few minutes later, clipboard in hand and a studied calm on her face. "They'll be doing a few more scans today," she said, "just routine follow-ups, nothing urgent." Olivia nodded. Her mind was quiet, but not at peace. The dream from the night before still lingered behind her eyes, the image of her child asleep in a ruined church etched into her memory like scripture. She hadn't told anyone. Not her mother. Not the nurse. It didn't feel like something that needed explaining. It was hers. The ultrasound suite was colder than before. The air had that sterile bite that always clung to machinery. A new technician this time, older, more clinical. She didn't speak much, and when she did, her words were clipped, practiced. Olivia lay back, eyes on the ceiling tiles. The familiar warmth of the gel spread across her skin, and then the wand began its silent sweep. The monitor flickered to life. At first it was the same, the blurred black and white contours of her uterus, the curved spine of her child, the rhythmic blink of a beating heart. And then, there it was again. The other thing, it floated in the periphery, coiled like a question mark, then uncoiled, stretching almost lazily across the top of the screen. Olivia felt it before she saw it, like a subtle pressure along the wall of her womb. Not painful, but real. The technician paused, fingers frozen above the controls. She didn't speak, but Olivia saw her jaw clench slightly. A flicker of something, shock, revulsion, passed through her expression before it disappeared behind professionalism. Then came the click-click-click of captured images. The scan took longer than usual. Back in her room, Olivia waited. No one returned with results. No doctor stepped in. Hours passed. By early afternoon, her mother had stepped out to make calls. The hallway outside her room echoed with muted footsteps and clipped conversation. A nurse dropped off lunch Olivia didn't touch. At 3:07 p.m., her door opened again. Dr. Hammond entered, a folder in his hand and a look on his face that said everything before he spoke. He sat in the chair beside her bed, opened the folder, and let out a long, controlled breath. "It's a parasitic worm," he said, "a nematode, most likely Ascaris lumbricoides, a roundworm. It's rare in the U.S., but not impossible." Olivia said nothing. "They believe it likely migrated from your intestinal tract, possibly months ago," he continued. "We think it may have exploited a previous scar in your uterine wall, possibly from your second pregnancy." A beat of silence stretched between them. "How long has it been inside me?" she asked finally. "Hard to say. Possibly since before conception. These parasites can live in the human body for months, even years, without detection." She swallowed. "And it's alive." "Yes, and it's in there. With my baby." Dr. Hammond's lips pressed into a line. "Yes." Her mind tried to wrap itself around the logic, the biology, the timeline. But none of it mattered. None of it changed the fact that her womb, the sacred space she had fought so hard to protect, had been invaded, defiled, and it's moving, she said. "Yes." She stared at him, eyes flat. "Why didn't anyone tell me yesterday?" He hesitated. "We weren't sure," he said. "There was a committee meeting, infectious disease, maternal fetal medicine, we had to confirm before. But you knew," she said. "You all knew." He didn't answer. Olivia turned her face toward the wall. The silence between them was louder than any machine. Dr. Hammond stood. "We're monitoring everything closely. The baby is stable. For now, we'll review options." She didn't hear the rest. That night, while the world outside darkened under the thick Nebraska sky, she lay in bed and watched the monitor blink beside her. Her mother had returned, but barely spoke. There was nothing left to say. Later, after the hallway lights dimmed and the nurses' voices faded to a murmur, she felt it again. Movement. But not the soft kicks of her child, something else. It slid along her right side, curling low in her pelvis, then up again. She didn't need the screen to know where it was. She could feel it like a second heartbeat. Then it shifted again, and this time, pressed closer to the baby. Her hand flew to her belly. There was a sudden tightness. Not pain, just pressure. A pressure she recognized now as threat. The monitor beside her flickered. A nurse entered seconds later, having seen the readout from the station outside. "Everything okay?" she asked, already moving toward the bed. "I felt it," Olivia said. The nurse checked the fetal monitor, tapped a few buttons, heart rates normal. But Olivia wasn't looking at the numbers. She was staring into the distance, at nothing, at everything. because she had felt it slide, felt it twist, and for the first time she realized something she hadn't dared consider before. It wasn't just living in there, it was watching. She lay awake for most of the night, her hands resting on her belly like a barrier. There was no more pretending, no more hopeful denial. Whatever lived inside her wasn't just a complication, it was a cohabitant, uninvited, unforgiving. In the silence, her thoughts drifted backward, not to the pregnancy, not to the appointments or ultrasounds or due dates, but to Mexico, Merida, late summer. The air thick and sticky, sweat clinging to her skin like a second layer. She had gone there after her second loss, hoping the change of scenery would unstick the grief from her bones. It hadn't worked, but she had stayed anyway. There was a night, a rooftop gathering lit by paper lanterns and laughter. She had been with Raul, a friend of a friend, someone who spoke with music in his voice and always brought food. That night, he had brought ceviche, shrimp, pink and raw, bathed in lime juice, garnished with onions and cilantro. She hadn't wanted it. Her stomach had been uneasy already. But she hadn't wanted to offend. She had taken a bite. Then another. It was hours later when the cramping started, sharp but brief, enough to double her over, then vanish. She'd blamed it on bad shrimp, took a tablet, went to bed, slept it off. But now, the memory felt different. Sharper because of what followed. The strange fatigue, the nausea that lingered for weeks despite no pregnancy, the tightness in her gut that came and went, unexplained. And now, the thing inside her. Her breath caught as the dots connected, not like puzzle pieces clicking neatly, but like barbed wire twisting into place. Could it have started then? Had she carried it with her all this time? Had it lived inside her, dormant, until the moment her body dared to hope again? She sat up slowly, the sheets cool against her skin. The monitor beside her blinked, steady and impersonal. She pressed a hand to her stomach. The baby shifted slightly, a small reassuring kick. Still there, still fighting, but her other hand shook, because now the guilt had begun to settle in. This wasn't just happening to her. She had invited it in. Unknowingly, yes, but nonetheless. Her child was suffering the consequences of her choices. A single meal, a lapse in caution, a spoonful of raw shrimp had opened the door, and something had walked through. She whispered, "I'm sorry." But the words felt thin, useless in the sterile air. A wave of nausea rolled through her. She reached for the basin beside her bed, breathing slowly, waiting for it to pass. It did, but it left behind something worse than sickness: shame. Then, without warning, the memory of the dream returned. The ruined church, the child alone in light, the darkness slithering closer. Only this time it wasn't memory, it was recurrence. Her mind flashed, not in dream but in waking hallucination, an image so sudden and clear it stole her breath, the baby's eyes opening again. But this time they weren't calm, they were afraid. She gasped and gripped the sheets. It faded quickly, but the feeling remained, cold, hollow. She needed answers. She needed to know how much danger the baby was truly in. She needed someone to be honest. But above all, she needed to forgive herself. Because if she didn't, she wouldn't have the strength to face what came next. The door opened gently and her mother stepped in, carrying a new pair of socks and a small travel Bible she hadn't seen in years. "Thought this might help," her mother said, placing it on the nightstand. Olivia didn't respond. Her eyes were still fixed on the place where the image had been. Her mother sat beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You're stronger than this," she said quietly. "No," Olivia said finally. "I'm not. You're still here." She nodded, barely. "And so is that baby." A long silence followed. Then Olivia asked, "What if I caused this?" Her mother looked at her, expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, she said, "Then it's your job to undo it. Not with guilt, with love." The words didn't fix anything, but they anchored something, and for the first time since the ultrasound, Olivia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way forward. The options were laid out with surgical precision. On a cold morning when frost still dusted the windows, Dr. Hammond returned with a second doctor, Dr. Vance, the maternal-fetal medicine specialist. Together, they spoke in clinical tones, calm but deliberate. "There are two paths forward," Dr. Vance said. Olivia sat upright, her mother beside her, the white sheet pulled tightly over her lap like armor. "Option 1, surgical intervention. We can perform a C-section and remove both the fetus and the parasite. The risk is high. Your child is preterm, just barely at the threshold of viability. Lung development is incomplete, and the trauma of surgery could result in severe complications. The chances of survival? Maybe 50-50. Olivia said nothing. The words moved through her like a cold wind. Option 2, we continue observation. Allow the pregnancy to progress. We monitor fetal movement, parasite activity, uterine integrity. But it's unpredictable. The parasite could rupture the amniotic sac, could interfere with the umbilical cord. It could turn fatal without warning. And there's nothing else? Olivia asked. No third choice? Dr. Hammond shook his head. We've spoken to parasitologists across the country. This case is nearly unprecedented. In any other part of the body we could act. But inside the womb, he didn't finish. Silence fell over the room. Only the monitor beeped softly beside her. One heartbeat, one truth. They left her alone to decide. When the door closed, Olivia stared at her hands. She didn't feel like a mother in that moment. She felt like a gatekeeper, between risk and risk, between death by action and death by hesitation. Her mother said nothing, only reached out and took her hand. I can't choose, Olivia whispered. You can, her mother replied gently. You just don't want to. Olivia blinked back tears. What if I choose wrong? Her mother tightened her grip. Then you carry the pain. But you do it as a mother, not a coward. The words stung. But they rang true. She lay back against the pillows and closed her eyes. The room faded. Her thoughts tunneled inward. And for a moment there was no hospital, no machines, no voices, only silence. And then a voice she hadn't heard in days. Not outside, inside, soft, still. I'm here. She was no longer in the hospital. In the space between sleep and consciousness, Olivia stood waist-deep in water. It was not cold, not warm. It simply was. A stillness so complete it felt holy. The water reached just below her ribs, and though she could not see its bottom, she was not afraid. The sky above was white, not cloudy, not clear, just endless like a canvas yet to be painted. Around her, nothing moved, no sound, no ripple, only her breath and something else. Then she felt it, a small hand slipping into hers. She looked down. There was the child. Not as a fetus, not as a newborn, but as something in between, a soul in shape, not yet molded by time. The child's fingers curled around hers, small and perfect, impossibly real. No words passed between them, none were needed. The child looked up at her, and in those eyes she saw no fear, only trust. It was a trust that stripped her bare, that exposed the fragile heart she had tried to protect for so long. She felt the water rise just slightly, brushing her skin with a quiet hum, as if the world itself was breathing. Then came the light, not blinding, not divine, just present. It moved across the water's surface like a dawn breaking beneath the skin of the world. And in its center was motion. Darkness swimming at the edge, circling, waiting. She looked back to the child, still there, still holding her hand. And for the first time, Olivia didn't flinch. She didn't cry, she didn't run. She stood, not as a victim, but as a guardian. The water receded, the light dimmed, and she woke. The hospital ceiling greeted her with its usual pale indifference. But something had changed. The weight in her chest had shifted, not lifted but rearranged, manageable, bearable, real. She sat up slowly, placing both hands on her stomach. The baby kicked once, soft, almost playful. I felt you, she whispered. I saw you. Her mother stirred in the corner, half asleep in the visitor's chair. Olivia didn't wake her. She didn't need a second opinion. She already knew what came next. When Dr. Hammond returned that morning, clipboard in hand, face prepared for uncertainty, Olivia spoke before he could. I'm not choosing either option, she said. He blinked. Olivia, I'm waiting. He hesitated. There are risks. I know. You may not have another chance. I know. She looked him square in the eye. But he's not alone in there, not anymore. There was nothing else to say. The decision had been made. She would wait. Not because it was safe, not because it was smart, but because she had seen her child, and he had taken her hand. The days that followed were long, suspended in tension so quiet it buzzed. Every morning began with an ultrasound. Olivia would lie in the dimly lit room while technicians moved the probe across her belly, eyes fixed on the screen, recording every twitch, every heartbeat, every unexpected ripple in the amniotic sea. The baby remained active, small stretching limbs, thumb tucked in mouth. But the other figure, the invader, was never far. Some days it hovered quietly, a lazy curve in the fluid, inert and seemingly harmless. Other days it moved, not erratically but with eerie awareness, gliding behind the baby, slipping through shadows like it belonged there. On the third morning it slithered close to the umbilical cord. Olivia didn't see it, but the way the technician froze, breath held mid-sentence, told her everything. She watched his eyes narrow, his grip tighten around the wand. "It's near the cord," he whispered to Dr. Hammond, who stood in the corner reviewing notes. The words were meant to be quiet. Olivia heard them anyway. She gripped the sides of the bed. Dr. Hammond stepped closer, squinting at the screen. The worm, long, thin, almost elegant in its motion, curled briefly, brushing the cord once, then again. For a full 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then, as if reacting to some unseen force, the creature retreated. Not in panic, not in pain, just withdrew, folded itself back into the far pocket of fluid and disappeared behind the baby's spine. No one spoke for a long time. The technician captured the frame, saved the recording, and slowly turned off the machine. "That's never happened before," he said finally. "What hasn't?" Olivia asked, her voice tight. "The cord. Parasites don't usually avoid them," he said. "Maybe it's coincidence," Dr. Hammond added quickly, "or reaction to sound waves." But his voice lacked conviction. Back in her room, Olivia stared out the window, watching wind move through dry autumn branches. Her hand rested lightly on her stomach. The baby kicked, twice, then again. A rhythm, a signal. Her mother brought soup that afternoon but said little. There was no need. The mood had changed. Not with certainty, but with curiosity. Even the nurses, who had once entered her room like walking on glass, now asked questions, soft ones, cautious. "How's he moving today? Still holding strong?" No one mentioned the parasite, but its presence was in every glance, every note scribbled quietly in the hallway. It was the night nurse who said it first. Her name was Lena, young, new, barely out of nursing school. She had warm eyes and a habit of humming softly when adjusting monitors. Olivia had come to recognize her presence not by footsteps, but by the quiet tune she carried, like a thread of comfort through the sterile dark. That night, after the 11 p.m. fetal check, Lena lingered a little longer. "I know this sounds strange," she said, adjusting Olivia's blanket, "but I think he knows." "Knows what?" Olivia asked. Lena smiled, then looked down at the monitor where the baby's heartbeat pulsed steady and strong, that there's something in there with him, and that he's not supposed to let it win. It was such a simple statement. Childish, almost like something from a fairy tale whispered at bedtime. But Olivia didn't laugh, because deep down she had begun to feel it too. The next evening, just after 2 a.m., it happened again. Olivia woke to the sensation, soft at first, like a ripple beneath her skin, then more distinct. The creature was moving. She could feel it, not erratic, not panicked. Purposeful. It pressed upward, curling slowly along her left side. Then a shift, toward center, toward the cord. She sat upright, hand over her belly, whispering, "No. Not now, not now." The fetal monitor beeped louder, faster. The heart rate had spiked, not dangerously, but unmistakably. The creature paused, then it retreated, just like before. Olivia stared at the ceiling, eyes wide, chest tight. She didn't call the nurse. She didn't need confirmation. She had felt it, all of it. The worm had approached, the baby had reacted, and something had changed the outcome. By morning, the story had made its way through the ward, not as fact, not in reports, but in tone. The way staff walked in with less hesitation, the way nurses exchanged glances that said more than words. No one dared call it a miracle, but the word hovered unspoken, like dust in sunlight. Even Dr. Hammond, ever the pragmatist, lingered a little longer during rounds. His questions became softer, his notes more detailed. He didn't voice belief, but he didn't argue when Lena brought in a tiny crocheted blue hat just in case. By the end of the week, Olivia no longer felt like a patient suspended between two disasters. She felt like a mother waiting for something extraordinary, and somehow, against every chart, every scan, every logic-bound probability, she believed her child would be ready. The storm arrived earlier than expected. By midnight, snow was coming down in thick, relentless sheets, blanketing the roads, burying cars, silencing the town in white. Nebraska had known winters before, but not like this. Not this fast, not this heavy. Inside the hospital, everything slowed. Elective surgeries were canceled. Staff stayed overnight. A generator hummed in the basement, its low vibration a reminder that comfort now depended on something fragile. And in room 214, Olivia Campbell went into labor. She felt the first contraction around 3:18 a.m., a deep, tightening pull across her abdomen that stole her breath. Then another, stronger, closer. A nurse checked her dilation. 4 centimeters, she whispered. You're in early labor. Olivia gripped the bed rail. Her mother stood beside her, eyes wide, hand trembling. The OB on duty had been rerouted by snowdrifts. Dr. Hammond, already in the hospital, took lead. His face, calm but pale, held none of the controlled distance it once had. This was no longer clinical. This was personal. 34 weeks, he muttered. We're early, but we're not out of options. The fetal monitor blinked, capturing a steady but climbing heart rate. Another contraction tore through Olivia's body, sharper this time, urgent. Her breath came in ragged bursts. We'll need to prep the OR, Dr. Hammond told the nurse. C-section. Now. But with the storm, the nurse began, get whoever's still here. I'll take the incision. In the hallway, someone slipped. A tray clattered to the floor. Another generator groaned, then clicked louder. Olivia was wheeled toward surgery as snow slammed sideways against the windows, wind howling like a voice just beyond the glass. She could barely see, but she could feel. Inside her, the child moved, and something else didn't. The pressure she'd known for weeks, the subtle shifts, the unwelcome coiling, it was gone. She whispered, "It's still. The thing, it's still." Dr. Hammond glanced at her as they rushed through double doors. Maybe it's weakened, maybe it's dying. Or maybe, she thought, he's already won. The operating room was lit in cold blue and silver. Harsh fluorescence glared against the metal trays, the masks, the gloved hands moving in silence. Only 4 staff were present, Dr. Hammond, 2 nurses, and the anesthesiologist who had arrived just before the storm locked the doors. Snow pounded against the windows like soft fists, but inside the room there was only breath, tension, and time slowing down. The incision was made cleanly. The uterus was exposed. And when they opened the amniotic sac, a gasp filled the room. The fluid was dark, clouded with something heavier than blood. Not the clear, sterile fluid they expected, but a murky, silted wash tinged with decay. One of the nurses looked away, her hand rising instinctively to cover her mouth behind the mask. The baby emerged seconds later, limp, gray-blue, small, no cry, no sound, no motion. The cord was clamped, the body passed swiftly to the neonatal nurse. Olivia, conscious but numbed by spinal anesthesia, stared at the ceiling tiles, unable to speak. But her heart screamed. She tried to move her head, to see something, anything. All she could hear was the absence of everything. Then she heard it, a whisper, from somewhere far away, or inside. Wait. The room held its breath. The nurse cleared the baby's mouth, stimulated the chest. Still nothing. Then a sound, small, raspy, then again. And suddenly a cry, thin, wild, defiant. The sound cracked through the air like lightning across ice. Olivia sobbed without meaning to. Her entire body trembled, even though she could not feel her legs. The nurse held the child up, alive, squirming, lungs drawing breath like it had waited too long to scream. "It's a boy," someone said, though it didn't matter. Not then. Dr. Hammond exhaled so deeply it sounded like a prayer. The room, so still before, moved again. Machines whirred. Hands passed instruments. A life had entered, and it had chosen to stay. Behind the placenta, curled tight in the folds of the uterine wall, they found the worm. No longer moving, not decomposed, but collapsed, coiled into itself like a rope burned from within. It had not been removed by force. It had not been flushed by medicine. It had died in place. They preserved it for pathology, sealed it in a sterile jar. But Olivia didn't ask to see it. Her eyes were on her child, now wrapped in a soft blue blanket held gently at her side. His fingers moved against her palm, tiny, real. She breathed him in. He smelled like salt, skin, and newness, like everything she thought she'd lost. And from somewhere deep in her chest, a truth bloomed. Not science, not medicine, but something older. He had survived. The worm was removed in silence. No alarms, no sudden instructions, just a gloved hand reaching gently behind the placenta, lifting the coiled remains with quiet precision. It was limp, intact, almost delicate. A thing that once slithered and claimed space now collapsed into stillness, its body folded inward like a dying fern. They placed it in a clear specimen jar, sealed and labeled for pathology. It floated there, pale and featureless, a shape without menace now that it was lifeless. Dr. Hammond stared at it for a long time. "It's intact," he said quietly to the pathologist. "No visible trauma, no bleeding, no rupture. But it's dead," the technician replied, clearly. They ran tests, microscopic imaging, histology slides. There was no sign of poisoning, no bacterial infection, no exposure to medication that could have killed it, no immune response in the surrounding tissue. The worm was simply dead. Suffocated, compressed, something else? The medical notes used words like inconclusive and unknown physiological cause. But Olivia didn't care. She didn't ask for results. She didn't want the theories. She had seen enough, felt enough to know the truth no lab report could explain. Her baby had done it. He had fought. He had won. The placenta, when examined, revealed signs of abnormal thickening along the outer folds, especially near the area where the worm had been found. It was as if the tissue had wrapped itself around the intruder, forming a barrier, not quite calcified, not scarred, something in between, a quiet entrapment. The report described it as atypical fibrin concentration and compression structure, a medical euphemism for something biology didn't predict. To Olivia, it felt like instinct, the body protecting what mattered most. On the second day after birth, she was moved to a recovery suite, larger, with windows overlooking the backfield where snow had finally begun to melt. The storm had passed. The air smelled cleaner. The sky, though gray, seemed lighter somehow. She held her son skin to skin, listening to his breaths, short, soft, alive. His fingers curled around hers with surprising strength. They hadn't named him yet. There were suggestions, family names, saints, words that meant strength in Latin or Hebrew. But nothing settled. Nothing felt right. Until her mother, sitting by the window, whispered, "What about something simple?" Olivia looked up. Hope. Olivia turned to the child, watched his chest rise and fall against hers. Hope. Not just a word, a declaration. She said it once, softly. The baby stirred, and that was it. In the following week, medical journals reached out. The hospital ethics board filed reports. The story, though contained for now, would eventually make its way beyond Nebraska. Conferences would discuss it. Papers would argue over it. Some would try to explain. Others would try to disprove. But none of that mattered to her. Because Olivia knew something that couldn't be cited or footnoted. She had watched the darkness grow. She had felt the fear settle in her bones. She had tasted helplessness and guilt and the bitter edge of uncertainty. And still, she had waited. She had believed. And in return, her child had survived not by accident, but by will, not with science, but with something older, something that refused to be named. Years later, the story was no longer confined to hospital rooms or medical files. It had become something else, passed quietly between professionals at conferences, whispered in academic corners, occasionally surfacing in articles, with titles like Unexplained Intrauterine Parasitic Coexistence, or Case 342 Billions, Unknown Fetal Immune Response. But for Olivia, it lived in a much smaller space. A home, a voice, a boy. He was 10 now, healthy, lanky, a mess of sun-streaked hair and scraped knees. He ran like the wind, never quite touching the ground, always reaching for something just out of frame. His laughter echoed in the kitchen, down the hallway, into the yard. It was a sound Olivia never tired of, a sound that reminded her, daily, of everything that could have been lost, and wasn't. They rarely spoke of the early days, not because they were painful, but because they were sacred. There were photo albums filled with baby pictures, doctor's notes tucked into the back of drawers, and a sealed jar, never opened, buried deep in hospital archives, labeled with a number instead of a name. But on his 10th birthday, Hope asked. They were sitting under the maple tree in the backyard, the sun tilting golden behind the fence, casting long shadows over their bare feet. "Why did you name me Hope?" he asked, not in the curious tone of a child, but with the searching heart of someone who somehow already knew part of the answer. Olivia looked at him for a long time. Then, softly, she began. "There was a time," she said, "when I wasn't sure you'd ever make it into this world. There was something inside me, something no one understood, It was dangerous. It wanted to take the space that belonged to you. Hope listened, his brows pulled tight, his breath still. And while everyone else told me to give up, she continued, "You didn't. You fought. I don't know how. But I felt it. Every day, like a heartbeat that wouldn't stop, no matter what tried to silence it." He didn't interrupt. She reached for his hand. "I named you Hope," she said, "because that's what you gave me. Not just in the moment, not just to survive, but to keep believing that sometimes the impossible isn't, that some lives are born and others are fought for." Hope looked down at his hand, then back up at her. "And mine?" She smiled. "Yours was both." That night, after the cake and the candles and the cleanup, Olivia sat alone at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the space between her thoughts. The house had quieted, the boy already asleep upstairs, tangled in sheets and dreams. She picked up her phone and opened the recording app. Not for fame, not for proof, but because some stories deserve to be told in their own time, in their own voice. She spoke into the quiet. "My name is Olivia Campbell," she began, "and 10 years ago I gave birth to a boy who wasn't supposed to survive. This is the story of how he did." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to, because the story wasn't about fear anymore. It was about resilience, about stillness that breaks, about darkness that retreats, about the space inside a woman's body that became a battleground and the child who won it, not with force, but with presence. She paused, then added one last line. "If you've ever doubted that something small can stand against something vast, let me tell you what it felt like to hold hope in my hands." She pressed stop, and in the silence that followed, she smiled. Some stories stay with us, not because they're loud, but because they whisper something true. Olivia's journey wasn't just about fear or survival. It was about trust, about believing when no one else could, about the quiet strength we carry, even when we feel powerless. If this story moved you, made you pause, or made you believe in something more, subscribe to the channel. We share true stories that stir the heart, challenge the mind, and stay with you long after the last word.